The winds were fierce this dawn. Dark winter trees shook restlessly in protest against the breeze that swept through them, some stretching up so high they almost seemed to scratch the very apex of the sky itself. Overhead, gray clouds congealed in a thick, dull mass, occasionally threatened to unleash a snowstorm, but, in reality, releasing no more than a shower of wintry hail every hour or so. Much of life on the ground was quiet now. Many of the squirrels, rabbits, and other small creatures had already well established their hibernation for winter. But the howls of wolves and the calls of wild dogs and bears could be heard to echo through the mountaintops as they searched for more meals for their stockpiles, and young salmon could be seen still leaping out of the near-frozen stream that stretched along past the dirt tracks. The harsh and wild landscape of the southern Falkreath lands was rivaled only by its persistent, raw beauty that carried on throughout all of its climates. The winds realized its strength and pushed it further along the ravine, inspiring the waters to flow in a fiercer way. Freya huddled herself more into her sheepskin cloak, wrapping it around her as best she could, embracing the irony of her father's name in this time. How many Windcatchers are there in all of Skyrim, and I happen to be such a cursed one, she thought, walking further along the side of the stream, occasionally checking the weight and feel of her backpack to ensure that the precious goods she carried were still with her. She thought to stay along the ravine a while and catch some fish for breakfast, but the bite of the wind was too much for her to handle so early in the day, and thus she pressed towards her destination, adamant to at least reach Riverwood by noon. Hours passed. The ravine slowly turned from a rocky mass of freezing water into a delicate, shallow stream that led Freya up to the road of exactly where she was hoping to be. The town of Riverwood was quiet and calm this afternoon, and the sun had started to break through the morning clouds, offering the town a warm, golden coat. The people were mostly concerned with their regular duties of the day, and yet she heard the babbling of an old woman speaking nonsense to her son, as the local blacksmith stood pensively at the door of his workshop, stroking his beard with an expression of intense concern that was hard to miss. In the back, a much younger man in imperial attire was working on steel at the forge that was attached to the house. He looked up at Freya for a moment before returning to his austere work, his face serious and somber.
"Hail, traveler,"
said the older man who stood in the raised wooden porch, after finally noticing Freya walking past him.
"Where do you go today? Are you interested in some armor or weapons?"
Freya shook her head.
No, thank you, blacksmith. I am simply stopping by. I hope to dine in the tavern. This is Riverwood, correct?
Aye, that it is. You're not the first serious-looking newcomer to pass through here today. It's a strange day, I tell you.
Why is that, sir?
The old man shuffled his feet awkwardly and cleared his throat.
Nothing. Where are you heading, traveler?
This time it was Freya's turn to feel awkward.
I'm looking for someone. Somebody very important. Need to deliver something to them. Next stop is Whiterun.
A young girl like you on a quest to find someone. Are you sure you don't need weapons?
Freya calmly motioned to the great sword that was strapped to her back.
I can take care of myself.
She started walking to the tavern as the old man called out once more.
Having a good blade is all well and good, but do you know how to use it?
Freya rolled her eyes.
I can take care of myself.
She heard the old blacksmith chuckle as she took her leave, and couldn't help but crack a small smile. The tavern was a welcome warmth for her. After several days on the Falkreath Road, Freya was happy to finally get somewhere warm and eat a real meal again. The potato, cabbage, and blood sausage soup served by the rugged barkeep was exactly what she needed, and the fierce fireplace of the room gave her some much-needed meditation for a short while before setting off on the road again. As she rested, she reflected on her quest, and she pulled her bag tight to her in case anyone would think to steal it without her knowing. Her eyes closed a while, and she enjoyed a brief snooze for all of an hour. Shortly after her nap, Freya set off again, leaving Riverwood with the hopes of reaching Whiterun before dark. As far as she could make out, it wasn't too difficult to get there, based on the barkeep's directions. Follow the path out of Riverwood and wait until the road forks and take the left path. She nodded to herself in reassurance. Following the stream out of Riverwood, she walked for a while and was greeted with the peaceful chattering of birds overhead. As the road forked, she turned away from the stream and onto a narrower path that flirted along the edges of a wide thicket. But then the road seemed to grow harder as the wind whistled its warning songs of winter to her. Mountains crept into the foreground around her, the rough path underfoot slowly turning into colder stone. She marched onward into stony, hilly land that reached a small peak, extending through a creviced meeting of two earthen bodies and naturally declining back to flank a stream that rushed along calmly on the other side. Freya's eyes traced along the stream as she descended the mound. The road ahead then stretched on for a while, but in the distance she could see the welcoming sight of a hamlet emerge slowly into view. But as she got closer to the tiny village, something seemed amiss.
Where is everybody?
She scanned the road cutting through the hamlet, down the alleys that were squeezed between the silent houses. There was an obvious sign of life here, but it seemed recently abandoned for reasons unknown. She walked to the small inn, the only apparent public place in the hamlet that was small and nestled tight between two homes. The door, while heavy, had been left ajar, and a breeze awkwardly pushed and pulled it to and fro. Inside, the tavern throbbed with cold, eerie silence, save for the whistling of the wind that rattled the shutters and the creaks of old wood that shook calmly under the pressure of the winter storm. A dulled light leaked through the half-open windows, streaming lines of delicate silver through a field of dust that had awoken from its lifeless slumber as Freya stepped inside.
Is anyone here? Hello?
She called out cautiously to the gray silence. Nothing. But then, something stirred. It was like the creaking of an old ship or the moaning of expanding wood against seawater, otherworldly and large, and seemed to shiver from the floors below. Perplexed, Freya darted to the stairs, descending into the tavern basement. The door was already wide open, but aside from the afternoon half-light on the upper floors, it was utterly pitch black inside. And though she could see naught but darkness, she had the strangest sense that there was someone else in the room with her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood straight. She brandished the dagger that nestled by her belt and backed away toward the stairs again.
If someone is here, you had better show yourselves right now, or I'll come and get you myself.
Her voice was fierce and strong, just like her father's had been. All was silent for what seemed like an age. And yet the emptiness appeared utterly shattered by a hint of noise that bounded to her. A single intake of breath and nothing more, and her heartbeat rose in abject fear.
Come out!
But before Freya could finish her sentence, the blackness was broken suddenly by a spontaneous growth of fire about her. In the newfound light, she saw suddenly that the floor all around her was littered with the dead, contorted obscurely and unnaturally in a circle. And within the circle, there shimmered a silhouette of a man in a shape that could not be defined by anything sane. Bizarre and otherworldly, his face was the color of patterned deep red and sooted black. And from his head protruded a dozen small horns, and from it 2 deep red eyes stared silently and directly at her, and fear took hold of her. She ran up the stairs and darted through and out the tavern and into the safe outside. But by the time she reached the door, the building was already consumed in thick smoke. She coughed uncontrollably, trying to regain her sense, heart pounding all the while. But before she could go any further to flee the hamlet, a heavy armored hand landed on her shoulder, and she shrieked in fear. She looked up immediately and was met face to face with a uniformed soldier in a face-covering helmet. Behind him there stood 2 others. A voice echoed from inside the ominous helmet.
In the name of the Jarl of Whiterun, I place you under arrest, under suspicion of murder and arson.
Thank you all so much for listening to the first episode of Freya Windcatcher. Freya Windcatcher is written by Benjamin Steed. The opening and ending theme song are written and performed by Mike Murdoch. Freya Windcatcher is played by Sarah Nightmare. The Blacksmith is played by Voice NB17. The Whiterun Guard is played by Jackson Kessaker. And the narrator is played by me, Original Nick. All of the links to everyone's Fiverr account and Casting Call Club will be down below. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you listen to the next episode of Freya Windcatcher.